Okay, let me get started because we are only scheduled to be here for half an hour. And the first thing I'm going to say that when you're thinking about quizzes in Brightspace, you should ask yourself the question, do I want to use a quiz or is another type of tool more appropriate? And within Brightspace, we have quizzes, we have surveys and self-assessments. And I think sort of they are relatively intuitive, pardon me, flipping between screens here, in terms of what they mean. So quizzes tend to be used when we're trying to do formative or summative assessments of our students. Surveys can be used just to sort of gauge opinion and get feedback on students' interests. And then self-assessments generally are for students' purposes. The instructors don't tend to see that information. Okay. All right. So, pick the most appropriate tool for your situation. Tip number one, the question library. So I'm going to emphasize this when we go through the demo as well, but you can enter questions directly into a quiz or survey or self-assessment, but I highly recommend making sure you use the question library. That way you can reuse those questions in future in any of the tools that we have. And that way you're not always retyping the questions. So my recommendation is build up your library, and then over time you have a lot of questions to pull from. It makes much easier to build quizzes or multiple quizzes. I'll show you when we get in there that you can make use of sections to organize your quiz questions. Again, making it easier for you to build quizzes or surveys or self-assessments that reflect the content that you have been working on. And then you can also import questions, and I'll touch on that briefly as well. Tip number two, the Bloom alignment. So for those of you familiar with Bloom's taxonomy of learning, there is some conceptions or misconceptions perhaps that quizzes can only be used to check understanding and memory. But one of my colleagues helped put this together for me, and you can actually see, depending on the types of questions that you're using, you can actually use that to evaluate the different aspects of Bloom's taxonomy. So don't feel like quizzes are limited in their use. They can be used for quite a variety of purposes. And we have quite a selection of different types of questions that you can make use of. Tip number three, put your quiz in the content flow. So we'll show you this in our demo as well. But by putting the quiz directly into your content flow, it becomes sort of a natural part of the content. So if students are clicking next and moving through content, then the quiz can be placed exactly where you want it. It'll come up. And in this example, you can see on the screen here, students are expected to go through the intro to planets, and then they would go through a planets quiz before moving on to the advanced planets. By putting it directly in your content like this, it's easy for them to find, and it forms a natural part of the flow. Tip number four, using quiz scores. So with quiz scores and intelligent agents, you can congratulate your students, or perhaps ask questions if they want to follow up with you. Are they struggling with certain things? You can also release additional material to students. So using the release conditions, if they score below a certain score, or if they score poorly on certain questions, then you can release additional material. The other idea that has been suggested is flip the classroom a little bit. So get the students to do some reading, fill out a quiz, and then based on the areas that they do well on or the areas that they do poorly on, you can tailor the classroom activities to suit. Tip number five, some fun use cases. So I'll show you this when we get into the demo portion, where you actually have the full HTML editor there, or at least a good portion of the HTML editor options. And so you can insert pictures or videos into your questions and making them a little bit more interesting for students. We can also, coming back to the idea of the release conditions, we can do things like offer badges for students. And so one use case I've seen or heard about where you allow the students to take the quiz multiple times. And if they score above a certain level, they get a certain badge. And so some students may go back and do the quiz multiple times, trying to improve their scores and get another badge or a better badge. If you are making use of quizzes for review purposes by using your question libraries, you can create a large selection of random questions from each of your modules, and in doing so, help your students prepare for exam period. Maybe that's not a fun use case, that's a practical use case. And then this is another somewhat fun, somewhat practical use case. But perhaps in early on in your course, you want to help students understand how you will be grading. You can share a grading rubric with them, maybe give them a sample homework assignment, and then get them to use the rubric to, in a quiz sitting, to actually evaluate this example work you've given them. And that then, by doing so and sharing your feedback through the quiz, they may get a sense of how the rubrics work and what's expected of them throughout the course. All right, and quick tip number 6. And I'll show you this again, but we have a statistics option within the quizzing tool that can be super valuable for you to evaluate how individual students are doing, looking at your question performance, understanding which questions are being answered well or which ones students are having trouble with. And that can really help focus your class activities either individually or as a whole. Okay. All right, and that's the end of my tips. This will be shared with you, but we have a number of resources in the Brightspace community that you can make use of. If you go to the community, in the search bar, you look for any of these articles, you should find that information. Some of this we've covered, so deciding between quizzes and surveys, we already looked at. The quiz question converter, that allows you to take a Word document and convert it into a CSV file. Some best practice in the quiz tool is the first item. There's some webinars as well, the better quiz creation webinar, and understanding regular expressions. So for those that want to get really fancy with some of their fill in the blank or short answer questions, we have a fairly sophisticated expression editor that allows you to create the way to interpret questions. If I have a chance, I'll try and show you what I mean, and we'll go from there. All right, so with that, let me go into my sandbox. All right. So here we are in my sandbox. Your menu item may look a little bit different. I've set this up for today so I can show you each of these tools quickly. First thing I want to show you is the quiz tool here. So I've clicked on quizzes, and from here you can see you can manage your quizzes. You get to the question library and statistics. We'll talk about those. The question library was my first tip, and you can see you can access it directly from quizzes. If I go into surveys, you will see the same link, and if I go into self-assessments, you will also see the same link to the question library. So question library is common amongst all those tools, and it's the one thing I strongly recommend you make use of. Sorry, just checking my questions in the chat here. I will try and come back and answer some of those as we go through. All right, so let me dive into the question library since I've been promoting it so much. So when you open the question library today, it opens up and you have a file navigator on the left, depending on your settings. You can actually turn that on or off under settings. And it just lets you navigate through your library. So you can see already one of the things I wanted to highlight in your library is that you can create sections. And so if you're working on a course that has multiple units, maybe you divide your library of questions up into different units. If you want to create a section, you click on New, enter Section, and you put in a title. So this is my tips and tricks section. And you can put a description if you like. And you can hide these from students if you wish. There's a nice option to shuffle questions within the section automatically if you like. And then you save that. And you can see I've created a new section right here. Actually, I guess did I create a new section? Not sure if I created a section or a new library. Looks like I may have created a whole library. So within this section, I can create a section, subsection. All right, now we have a subsection. Okay, so that is the library, how you do that. And then within your library, you can simply add questions. And here's all the different types of questions that we support today. So the most common, of course, true or false, multiple choice, multiple selection, written response. This is sort of the long answer type question. Short answer, this is a simple 1 or 2 words. This is the one where I mentioned it has regular expressions, multiple short answers. So if you want to have multiple sort of fill in the blank style. We also have the fill in the blank, matching, ordering questions, and then some arithmetic questions and Likert. So if you're doing survey type questions, we also support Likert. These do not show up on quizzes or self-assessments, but just on surveys. So let's do a really simple question. Our solar system has planets. Pardon my typing. The answer is true, and we simply save that. So that's as easy as it is to create a new question. I did mention the fact that you could import questions, and we can upload a file of CSV. So here is the template. So click on, let me just show you that one more time. So if you want to import, click on import, click on upload file, and then the template is here. So if you download that template, it will download and you can open it up in Microsoft Excel. And it has examples of most of our question types. There was a question early on about fill in the blank. Fill in the blank is not included in the default template, and I'm going to check into whether I can get an example of that and whether it's supported through the CSV. But most of the typical question styles are promoted here. Then you would fill that in, upload it, and it gets imported into your library. I actually particularly like this CSV file format. I'm comfortable working in Excel. It also has the advantage of working in Excel as you can then do some additional sorting in columns and things like that to make it a bit easier if you have a large number of questions you're managing. Okay, that is the question library. Let me go back to quizzes. All right, so within the quizzes section, we saw the question library. You can create new quizzes. You can create categories of quizzes. So you can see here I have demonstration categories for quizzes that are used for demonstrations, and a quiz without a category. I can create as many as I'd like. You can view your quizzes just by their availability or by category. Of course, you can copy, you can reorder your quizzes. You can change the overall setting here. This is a handy way. Whoops. So if I want to change the visibility, I can click on change visibility or hide. And then, of course, you can delete. Okay, so those are the more actions and categories. Let's go into a specific quiz. Let's go into the very difficult quiz, and we can go over some of the key features of our quiz editor. So we have a bunch of tabs here, and these tabs are all about setting up the configuration for this particular quiz. And there's also this drop-down menu here that allows you to perform specific actions related to this quiz. So super important, as an instructor, you're going to want to be able to preview your quiz, and I can show you that quickly. So it starts up the quiz. You say you can bypass restrictions. So this lets you bypass any sort of start dates or end dates so that you can actually see the quiz. You click on start, and then it's going to show you our very difficult quiz. Okay, in this case, I just have 3 questions, and you can actually go through and answer the questions and submit your quiz. And you get the whole quiz experience just like the students would. All right, let's go back into our very difficult quiz. Grading, as instructors, this will be important for you. You're going to want to click on that once the students have submitted all their assignments, and you'll be able to see each student, how many attempts they've made. You can view by attempts, or grade by attempts if you like, or you can grade by question. This is kind of handy if you have on random ordering of questions, because this way you can go through and mark a particular question for all students rather than jumping all over the place between different questions. All right. What else? Reports. I'm not going to spend any time on reports, but you can set up reports to show you sort of the results of your quizzes. Statistics, we did talk about that, and this is a super handy feature, one that everybody loves. So you get individual user statistics on this tab. You can look at specific questions, how are they performing, and then the question details is nice for digging in and looking at all the responses in the questions, see how many people have answered each question. Gives you insight into how your students are doing, may also offer insight into questions that may not be worded well or are performing poorly. They're not actually giving you insight. I think, all right, enough on statistics. There's a lot of material to cover, so I realize I'm going pretty quickly, but I was hoping to get through most of this. All right, so that's the sort of action menu, as I like to call it. And then here's all the configuration options. So let's walk through some of this. Give your quiz a name. You can assign it the category here. This is a good tip, number of questions per page. There's different philosophies and preferences here. If you're doing surveys, there is a school of thought that would recommend you simply have a single question per page. And you just specify that and apply it. You can prevent moving backwards through pages. The part of the thinking here is if you're in a situation where there's a challenge with students copying or listening, if you have randomized your question and you prevent students from moving backwards through the quiz, it's less likely that they'll ever be on the same question at the same time as other students and be able to copy or cheat that way. So you can shuffle at the quiz level. There's advantages and disadvantages, especially if you're using multiple question types or have different sections. If you shuffle at the quiz level, then everything gets shuffled. So that's, again, a preference you can select. You then get to see the questions. You can add questions. So you click on add or edit questions, brings you up to the list of questions that are there. If I want to add from my question library, I click on import, browse question library. This was the library we looked at earlier. And I'm just going to add this one question, or I can add an entire library of questions or a subsection if I prefer. Okay, or of course I can enter a new question directly here. Again, with like the question library, you can also create sections, and you can also upload files. I'm not going to skip over question pools. That's a super important feature. So question pool basically lets you pick a group of questions. Demo tips and tricks question pool. So here you specify how many questions you want to include from your library. So I'm going to say 2. Then we go to our library. This is another reason why you should have a library. And let's go to my question library. So it shows you how many questions are in the library that you've included, and you're going to pick two of the 6. You can specify how many points you want. And here's a list of the questions that are included. So there's my very difficult quiz now has a question pool at the end. All right, so we've covered adding new questions. We've talked about sections. We've talked about question pools, and we've talked about importing files and browsing the question library. All right, let's go back to our settings. Restrictions, so if you've worked in Brightspace for a while, you may be familiar with restrictions. Come on, my computer is slowing down here. So controls overall visibility, so you can hide from users or make visible. The due date, so when is it actually due? When is it available, meaning when can students see it? And when can students no longer see it? Sorry, I shouldn't say see it. When can they actually access it, and when can they no longer access it? The hide from users actually controls whether they can see it or not. Okay. Release conditions, I'm not going to cover that. We've covered that in a separate tips and tricks. What other? You can add passwords. So for security purposes, if you're in an exam situation, you may want to have a password. We can also do IP range restrictions. Again, for examination purposes, this may be necessary. You can specify a time limit. So how long do you have to actually work on the quiz? Recommended and enforced. So with the enforced time limits, you will actually get kicked out after the period of time. And then we allow special access. So if you have exception cases, you can also configure those in this case. All right, so that's restrictions. Assessments. Okay, so we can associate to a grade item. So I can pick the grade item I want to associate this to. I can automatically grade these quizzes and export them to the grades. How many attempts are allowed is controlled under the assessments, and then which attempt actually will be assigned to the grade. So the lowest, the highest, the average, etc. Objectives, so if you have objectives in your system, you can tie your quiz to the objectives. Otherwise, I'm not going to cover that. Submission views, this one's also very popular to know about. So the default view of the quiz after it's submitted for students is to show them absolutely nothing. You can add additional views to show whatever you like. So let me just go through that quickly. Show questions. So I'm creating a view that's going to show students what they get to see after the quiz. This will show students, questions and answers. You can specify a date restriction when it's available. Again, you can also do IP restrictions just so you have a little bit more control over who can see it where. How long is it available? So if you want students to be able to see it, say, immediately after submitting for about 1 minute, or depending on how long the quiz is, a little longer. The idea here, of course, is we don't want people to be able to go back indefinitely and look at all the questions, copy them, share them with other people. And then what do they get to see? So right now the default is no. So let's show them some questions. And you can decide, do they only get to see the questions answered incorrectly? The ones that were shown answered correctly? Do we show the responses? Show all the questions? Show the answers? Okay. You can have, if you have standards, you can show those, and you can add some statistics as well. All right, so now I have created this additional view, and previously before the demo, I had also created this other one. Let me just delete that old one. All right, and that one's there. Save and close. All right. What else do we need to go back to my very difficult quiz? And that's it. Report setups, again, I'm not going to cover that. I did say I wanted to show you putting quizzes into your content. So let me just jump into the content here. And if you want to add a quiz, so I already have the planets quiz here, and I'm going to add another quiz. So you click on add existing activities, scroll down to quizzes, and I will add the tips and tricks quiz. And there it is now in my content. So in my content flow now I have intro to planets, the planets quiz, advanced planets, followed by the tips and tricks quiz. All right, we're right at time. I know there's a lot of material and I went very quickly. I do appreciate everyone asking all the questions in the Q&A. I will certainly go through the Q&A and respond to those with the message I send out later with a link to the recording. I will stay on the line for another minute or two and just scan through the questions and try and answer those, but if you have to drop off, I understand. So Lori asked if we can set the quiz to be opened an unlimited time. The answer is yes. I think I showed that through the demo already. So there's a question here about including images in the section. So you can include in the section. If we go into our very difficult quiz and we add and edit questions, I add a section. In this area, I can include images from your computer or URL that will show up in the section header. I'm not sure if that fully answers the question. It appears it only the first question in the section rather than each question. Okay, I'm gonna have to look into whether there's a way to make the section header show up for all questions in the section or not. I suspect that it only shows up at the top of the section, and then if you only have one question per page, you probably don't see that again, but I need to double check that. So self-assessments, yes, you put the, in the self-assessments, you put the correct answer or the feedback in the feedback section. That's been my experience as well. Question here, can you create a quiz that covers all sections randomized, randomly choosing X questions from each section so that the students get a different question covering all sections? So you can create a series of sections and randomize within the sections. And then you could randomize the entire quiz. So that would, I think, achieve what you're trying to do. Question was about using the Excel template. There isn't a dedicated webinar that I'm aware of, or even a reference on the community, but I can check on that. There is a quiz converter, which allows you to use Microsoft Word and convert your questions from Word into Excel. So that might be a way to get around that if you're not familiar with using Excel. There was a question about adjusting the default view. I think that's referring to the submission views. And the answer is yes. I believe you can edit the default view. So if I go into the default view, you can make changes here and save that. So rather than adding a separate view. Does a time limit in the submission view work if you set up a view for some time period after the student takes a quiz? Students takes it at noon Thursday, but the view isn't available until Friday. That's a good question in the Q&A about the timing of things. I'm gonna have to look into that, how that works, if one overrides the other. Can you share a quiz with another class in Brightspace? So there's a couple answers to that question. The easiest answer to that question is to use the copy components in their edit course. So if you give the other person or the other instructor, or if it's you, you can copy and import components between Brightspace courses. All right, I think I've touched on most of the questions that I see in the Q&A at the moment. So one question just popped in. So the question was, if I have the quiz set to be available, say, for a certain period of time, let's say it's an hour from 1 till 2, and the quiz takes 30 minutes, and they say, let's say the student starts the quiz at 10 minutes to 2. My experience is that they would have the full time available. They have to get started in the quiz during the period at which it's available, but then they will be able to complete the quiz during the full time available to them. So the availability window is only when they can start. Once they're started, they're in until the end of the time available. All right, I've gone 6 minutes over now. I appreciate everybody joining. I will get the recording sent out as soon as I can. I will also respond to the questions that I didn't have a chance to respond to. And as I said, I'm going to send out a survey with that email as well. I appreciate all the feedback you can give me. Thanks, everybody. Hope you found this helpful and picked up a couple tips along the way today. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe.